What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the channel, Legalese with Avi B, where I'm here to help you navigate the law with ease. So today we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. So I'm sure that you cannot imagine a criminal justice system that does not involve throwing people into jail, locking them up, and throwing away the key. But I want to let you all in on a secret. There is an alternative way to the way that we do criminal justice here in the United States, and it is called restorative justice. As you can tell, I'm extremely excited about restorative justice. It's a system in which I was introduced to while I was actually in law school. I had the pleasure of working with one of my professors who's very involved and active in the Durham community, and he actually introduced me to the whole process, and now I am involved in the Restorative Justice Durham project. So I'm sure some of you are like, Avion's girl, why are you so hype about this? It is because I love restorative justice. It forces us to think about the way in which we define what crime is, what punishment is, and what restoration is in the community. It forces us to really sit down and say, okay, who was harmed here? That's one of the number one questions of restorative justice, finding out who was harmed. Now, a lot of us think that when a crime occurs in the community, the only person who was harmed is the direct victim who suffered, whatever the crime may be. So if there was a larceny, we would think that whoever's property was stolen is the one who suffered the harm. But that's not always the case. That person may have suffered harm. Others in the community, their family members, the police officer who arrived on the scene. There are multiple parties. The actual person who may have stolen the property may have been harmed by previous circumstances that led them to that particular incident. It forces us to think exactly about who was harmed by the action, not just in that moment, but what led up to that moment. What circumstances the quote unquote offender has come from, what story. Everybody, each and every one of us has a story. And so restorative justice forces us to sit down and think about all of the factors that go into why a person commits a crime. And I love that because we don't just act. We don't just get up and go and do crazy things. I mean, some people do, but typically that doesn't happen. And so it forces us to think about exactly why an action occurred and who was harmed by it. So I'm not sure if you guys have seen Van Jones's restorative justice program on CNN, but if you haven't, it's called Redemption and it is dope. I really advise you guys watch it. It really shows exactly what restorative justice does in communities. So like I said, I was introduced to it a few years back and I watched my first circle process. So restorative justice, yes, is that it involves circles. And so what it does is it brings the person who was harmed, the victim, and it brings the person who committed the harm, what we label in society as the offender or the defendant. It brings those parties together. It also brings together whomever else in the community they feel that they need for support. So if the victim needs their family there, or if the other party needs certain people there to hold them accountable, then it brings all of these parties together into one big meeting called a circle process. And there's a facilitator who facilitates the entire conversation, who leads everything. And so the space is always extremely respectful. Each party gets to tell their side of the story and completely hear each other out. And in the end, it actually leads to like some feeling of redemption and restoration. It's awesome. I've participated in circle processes myself, and I even left, just as a spectator, I left feeling like I was impacted. So right here in Durham, North Carolina, we had a chance to experience restorative justice last year in a case in which a man had a gun in his apartment. It accidentally fired. The bullet went through his floor and shot the little girl who was staying in the apartment immediately beneath him. And it's a crazy situation, but the way that society tells us to label people and define people told us to lock him up and throw away the key, because how could you be so irresponsible? How could you allow your gun to go off accidentally? All of these things is what society teaches us to question. It teaches us to demonize and villainize someone who commits an act. But the most important lesson that I've learned as a criminal justice attorney is that we are not the sum of our worst mistakes. Everybody, like I said on the last video, everybody has committed a crime. Everybody just hasn't been caught for what they've done. And we are not the sum of the worst thing that happens in our lives. And so it should not define the entirety of our life. Now, I'm not saying that people should not be held accountable for their actions, because one of the main pillars of restorative justice is accountability. To even participate in restorative justice, you have to take accountability for your actions. You have to accept the charge for what you've done. You have to come into it with the mindset of, okay, I've done this and I feel some type of remorse for what I've done and I want to make this right. You can't engage in a restorative justice process without having the mindset of, okay, I take responsibility for my actions. And so I want to completely dispel that myth right now, is that it's just restorative justice is a process that's out here, just letting people free who do crazy things. That's not what it's about. So back to the case that I was discussing with the man right here in Durham, the DA agreed to host a restorative justice circle right here with the community members who were already engaged in the work. And it brought the two parties together, both the person who did the harm and the person who was harmed. They sat down and they were able to both share their stories. They were able to both come together. He was able to apologize and take account for his actions. She was actually able to forgive. And it was just such a beautiful moment. And there were several people involved who were there. Everybody left with wet eyes. There was not a dry eye in the room. And, I wasn't there, but I saw several videos and several of my colleagues were. And it was such an impactful moment, not just for those parties involved, but for the entire Durham community. And so, I just applaud the lawyers and the community members who are pushing that effort forward. And I am just blessed to even be a part of what the mission here is in Durham. But I want to see it expand all over the world. We don't have to throw people away. Contrary to popular belief, there is an alternative to just locking people away and throwing away the key and saying that, they come out rehabilitated, because they don't. We all know that prison does not help people. Like, it doesn't. But sitting down and talking to people is what mends communities. Showing love is what mends communities. And so restorative justice does just that. So one of the biggest advantages of the restorative justice system over the way that the criminal justice system does things is the fact that it is victim focused, or the person who suffered the harm is focused on them. So the current way that we do things in our system, I feel like it doesn't fully immerse the victim into what occurs. So the way that it happens is you come to court, the case is brought by the state. So wherever you reside, the state of North Carolina is the one who prosecutes you. And so essentially what I've seen several times happen is the victim will come to court, and the state may or may not take what they have to say into consideration. Now, a good DA will. They'll involve the victim in the entire process, but sometimes they won't. I've seen it to where in North Carolina, civilian warrants can be taken out, which we've already discussed, but a woman presses charges, or a man presses charges against somebody falsely, and will come to court and want to fess up and say, actually, I lied, it didn't happen, or I no longer want to proceed, or even just period. Even if it did happen, sometimes the victim does not want the person to go to jail, or does not want these harsh punishments to be imposed. And so restorative justice allows the victim to fully essentially take control over what happens. At the end of the circle process, after they've talked back and forth, there is an agreement that is made between the person who's done the harm and the person who suffered the harm. There's an actual written agreement that says exactly what they agree for the punishment to be, or for the retribution to be, so that both parties feel whole. And I love that. I love the fact that the victim has such a voice in what happens, because a lot of times if you ask someone what they want to happen to a person that's harmed them, they don't actually want them to go to jail. I've tried multiple times. I've asked people, well, what do you want to see happen here? They don't want to see them go to jail. They just want to feel whole. They just want something. And I feel like the way that our current system is set up, it's not set up for people to feel whole. It throws one person away. The other person actually doesn't, a lot of times, get the sorry that they want. They don't actually get repayment for whatever happens. But when you sit those two parties down face to face, there's nothing like human interaction and human contact that allows you to fully work through the process of what occurs. And often there's this greater understanding of two people as the stories collide. And the accountability agreement at the very end of it allows for some action to take place in the future that will restore both of the parties. And so in the case that I described earlier, one of the things that happened was that the man had to go and spread gun safety messages throughout the community. He had to go and bring awareness to gun safety. I love that, because not only is his life impacted, the victim's life was impacted, but other members of the community get to learn based off of this one mistake that he made. He wasn't thrown away in jail and left to rot, you know? And I just think it's important that restorative justice spreads not only right here in Durham, not only in North Carolina, but throughout the entire country. And I love the efforts that are being made. So there's a significant time in which parties have to plan before they actually come together. And so the facilitators go and meet with the person who suffered the harm, whether that's at their home or somewhere else in the community. Then you meet the person who's done the harm. Both parties meet individually first. They wrap their mind about what's about to take place. They talk their feelings through about what has occurred and what they want to see come about from the circle process individually first. And both parties make sure that they're fully ready to meet this person that they're kind of in confrontation with. And so they don't just go into it blind. There's full preparation beforehand. Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering, like, what's the end goal here? For everybody, it doesn't mean like, oh, I forgive you, let's hug. All circles don't end that way. Some people literally just want to say, you know, I'm sorry. The other person does not have to always fully accept that, but to hear that can bring some type of healing to them. So it doesn't always have to be kumbaya. Now, a lot of times it is. A lot of times both parties are crying and the officers are crying and the facilitators are crying. So it is it's emotional experience. It's a human experience. But it doesn't always have to be kumbaya. A lot of times it just allows people to work through what they're feeling. Another question I'm sure you guys have is, does restorative justice work in all cases? And so it seems like it would probably only work in like simple petty crimes, like small misdemeanors. But if you guys go and look on YouTube, you will see so many videos of restorative justice being applied in the craziest of situations. So I've seen a situation where a person was murdered, and there was a restorative justice circle around that between the offender. Now he was placed in prison, but restorative justice works in all phases of the criminal justice system that we have. So despite the fact that he'd already been convicted of a crime, he was able to sit down with the victim's family, the person who he raped and murdered. The family actually agreed to sit down and talk to him years after it occurred, and a restorative justice circle occurred in the prison, and just to see like how those lives changed from the conversation that was had just goes to show like what human compassion can do. Also, like I said, it doesn't just work in small cases, and that's an example of that, but it can work along the entire spectrum of small, simple misdemeanor cases to extreme felonies. It can work so long as the parties agree to do it, and as long as people's minds are open to the process. And again, like I said, it can happen in any stage of the criminal justice system. So that's even pre-conviction, before the trial even occurs, up until after the trial has occurred, even after the person has been released from prison, if that was the result of what. So that's pretty much my spiel on restorative justice. We can talk about this for sure at length in the comments if you guys have any thoughts or any other questions that you have for me about what this process involves and what it looks like, or how you can even get involved in your community. Feel free to let me know. Send me a message or comment, like, subscribe, all of that, and let's just engage about this whole entire criminal justice process. I love it. I love restorative justice. And so thanks for tuning in to another episode, guys, and I will see y'all next time. Bye. Thanks for watching.